Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
All
Thank
right.
you, Dr. Johnson. Would you like for me to go ahead and get started?
Yes. Go ahead on. I'm
All
turning
right,
it over to you, my friend.
fantastic. I am excited to have you all again for our afternoon session. Thank you to Dr. Johnson for setting this up. I am excited as well about this series of presentations. I'd like to go ahead and go in the order that they are um, on the document. So I'm going to ask Dr. Lederer and then Uh, Diana Humble, are you a PhD student or a doctor? I want to make sure I get the
I'm a PhD candidate.
PhD candidates. And then also Dr. Cassandra Gould from Eden Theological Seminary. So if we could go in that order, I would love for you all to introduce yourselves and let us know about your topic, and then we'll circle back to your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. First. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for offering invitations and to the center for providing the opportunity for us to all come together. My name is Reverend Dr. E. Michelle Letter. I live in Baltimore with my 10-year-old pit boxer mix cashmere that you might see in the background now that I'm going to be speaking. I am looking for work right now. So the description that I'll give you of myself is the little piecemeal things that I'm doing right now. I co-founded Anti-Racism for Reals with Reverend Sheila M. Beckford. And so we do anti-racism, anti-oppression training for groups and organizations and executive teams and things like that. We also do some writing and some work there. I'm on the ministerial staff at Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C., along with Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould. So I'm excited about this panel for that reason, too. And the project that I'll be talking about has to do with forgiveness and a faithful version of unforgiveness.
Thank you, Dr. Letter.
My name is Diana Humble. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Memphis. I'm going into my dissertation year, which I'm really excited about. My research centers around digital media, misogyny, and patriarchy generally. So I'm looking at incels, red pill ideology in my primary stream of research. But this project that I'm talking about today has a bit of a religious slant to it that I am not the most informed about. So I'm excited to be here in this room with you guys and get some ideas and get some feedback on that project.
All right.
Thank you.
Reverend Dr. Cassandra Gould, affectionately known as Pastor in the Public Square. I reside in Washington, D.C., currently serve as the National Political Director for Faith in Action National Network. I am an adjunct at my beloved seminary, Eden Theological Seminary, as well as have had the opportunity to be an adjunct at Memphis Theological Seminary. And as Dr. Letter said, I have the privilege of serving alongside her at Metropolitan AME Church, home of the Proud Boys. You don't know, look that up. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and
You're gonna have
all
to
of its
explain
wonderful scholars for the
that.
opportunity.
You're gonna have to explain that. Oh,
I'll explain it in my
right,
presentation.
okay.
All right, friends, I'll go ahead and I'll get us started with Dr. E. Michelle Lederer, who is doing Preaching Unforgiveness. And this seems to be, at least from the abstract, a pretty self-reflexive work on death penalty ethics and the rhetoric of forgiveness. So I will turn it over to Dr. Lederer.
Thank you. So first, let me say that I am at the conversational stage. This is not a presentation by any means. This is more me looking at multiple aspects of forgiveness and withholding forgiveness as being faithful. And I've looked at it from a lot of different angles, and I've considered it deeply from a lot of different angles. And I'm going to share some of those with you today. I'm thinking about how it might be possible to frame this as a book. I tend to be really practical in my public-facing work. So the way that I think about things might be deeply theologically formed, but then has expressly concrete application in the world. So you'll hear some of all of that in the items that I'm going to share. And I'm not necessarily sharing them in any particular order. So I haven't even framed them out yet to say, this is how I think the book would look or anything like that. I'm really just going to share maybe 6 pieces of the way that I'm thinking about this. And then to say, at the end of the day, is it possible that this could be the framework or some sort of framework could come of it and create a book that would be, again, deeply reflective, sure, but also deeply practical. Like, what does it mean to say that forgiveness is faithful? Or what does it mean, for me specifically, to say that unforgiveness is actually faithful and might be more faithful than forgiveness in some circumstances? So let me just jump in. Some of these examples are personal, some are theological, some are ritual, and some are biblical. But one of the things that I keep going back to over and over and over again is that I'm not convinced that forgiveness is the only faithful way forward for, I'll say, Christians, because I'm coming out of my own background and experience. I don't think that's the case. I think I can make a biblical rhetorical case for otherwise. And I think there are other ways that we can talk about it that would also make that case. But I'm interested in hearing responses and questions and things like that that will help me think about it further. So let me start with the one that showed up in the abstract. This is the most personal I could get in an abstract without sharing raw memories of things. So the death penalty example is an example that is personal for me, in that I had a student-teacher relationship with someone that was executed by the state of Georgia. And so I do not forgive the state of Georgia for executing her. The second example comes from Dylan Roof coming in and murdering Emmanuel, AME, clergy, and lay people. I am ordained in the AME Church. The AME Church and the AME people are my family. And Dylan Roof came in and murdered my family. I don't have any forgiveness for him. I don't have any problem. The language I used in the abstract was, in my full ordination, in my full AME ordination, have no problem wishing the death penalty upon him. The reason I shared that particular example in the abstract for 2 reasons. One is, again, I have deeply personal experiences of having to decide whether or not to forgive or not forgive people that are close to me, even within my blood family. These are traumatic examples. I don't feel like I have enough separation from them to be able to share those specifically yet. One of the things that I'm wondering about is, how should they be part of this overall framework, or am I being inauthentic if I don't share them, if it gets to like book form, right? But at least on July 29th, I'm able to share the death penalty one. So that's an example. It's a pretty far away example for me, though, of a personal experience of saying, I'm not totally persuaded with the idea that I've got to forgive everyone in order to be faithful. But again, it's a personal experience. I've got a personal relationship, or had a personal relationship, with Kelly Gissendaner. I feel a personal connection with my AME family being murdered. And so that's coming from my own experience. I've thought about it in different ways, though. So even in my MDiv work, I was writing a paper on communion. right? So the theology of communion, who gets to invite people to the communion table? And it's not the minister, it's God. God is the one that invites, and it's not up to us as, potential pastors or what have you to exclude people from the communion table. Well, I've got a big problem with that too. So the reason I have a big problem with that is that if there's for example, if there's a family and there's domestic violence going on in that family, and the direct target or the victim of domestic violence is forced to take communion at the same table as their abuser, I got a problem with that. Now, I'm not saying the person who is abusing others doesn't have any kind of access to God, that God might do some sort of miraculous work in their life. I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying that person's not coming to the table that I'm serving at. Now, again, it's a personal thing, right? But as a minister, I've got to make that decision. Am I always going to know? No, I'm not always going to know. But if I do know, then I'm going to make some sort of arrangement where that person can go and take communion at somebody else's table. So it's not that I believe that healing isn't available for everybody. It's not that I believe that everybody doesn't have access to some form of forgiveness. I also don't believe that the direct targets of abuse or harm have to suffer more harm under some sort of false understanding of inclusion or flattening of what it means to truly be part of the same table. So that's my little blip about the communion table. I was introduced to Han theology by the work of Andrew Sung Park, who helped me to put language to the theological difference between the sinner and the sinned against. Now, again, this language is very binary, and even in the early works, there's language that Dr. Park is offering about, how it's not as clean cut as that. It's not like sinners over here and sinned against over here. However, one of the things that he talks about quite a bit is how a lot of theology is based in from the perspective of the sinner, from the one who is sinning against others. And so when I think about forgiveness, I think about all the times that folks who are taking it from the perspective of someone who needs to be forgiven, then dumps that all over the folks who are the direct targets of harm. And so I'm asking that, could it be possible that it's actually more faithful to not forgive, to not have that burden be on the one who's been harmed? Now, there are plenty of definitions of forgiveness that try and get at this. But as someone who is personally wrestling with this in my own personal life, all of them fail for me. I haven't heard a definition of forgiveness that helps me find healing from what I've personally experienced. So if I can't find it from my own personal experience, then why would I want to subject somebody else to it? Now, the nuance of that is it seems to work for other folk. I've heard people's testimonies that it's worked for folks, like these other definitions of forgiveness. Like, it's not that you're excusing them, it's that you're freeing yourself and all of that kind of thing. So if it works for you, great, I'm all about it. However, I'm still stuck with my own question that continues through my own personal experience. So I've also done 2 sermons specifically, other sermons that probably weaves itself in there in some, deconstruction kind of way, but 2 specific ones, one on the Father forgive them, for they know not what they do, where I question whether or not, because Jesus is offering this also in the presence of enemies, that he's not code switching, and that he's saying those words because the enemy needs to hear them, but he's speaking to the people who are the direct targets and those who are going to be running after the cross in a different kind of way. Because of time, I'll just kind of name generally that that's what I'm doing. The other is the John 20:23 text. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven. If you withhold forgiveness from any, it is withheld. And I bring this up because these two texts are often brought up, like God forgives people, so you should forgive people. If you're going to be all about God, then you should do that because that's the faithful thing to do. What I'm suggesting in the John text is that Jesus has come to talk to folks about what they're going to do after Jesus is murdered on the cross. He's not talking to the victors. He's talking to the folks that are scared. They're worried. They don't know what's coming. They're targets of whatever violence is coming to the followers of Jesus. They are not the folks who are seeking forgiveness. They are the folks that are now in this text asked to determine who deserves forgiveness. What I'm saying is, instead of maybe Jesus, it doesn't go into the upper room and say, hey, forgive everybody because God does. Maybe Jesus is saying, hey, as the direct targets of violence and harm from the state, you are actually the best folks to be able to tell the difference of folks that actually deserve forgiveness and should receive it and those who should not. That there's actually, that those folks, those folks have an intrinsic wisdom within them that should be the arbiter of whether or not folks receive forgiveness in that moment that they decide. And again, this isn't like an ongoing thing. Folks who do some sort of harm and never receive forgiveness. I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about countering this blanket, force-fed, if you're going to be faithful, you better forgive, that leaves a lot of harm on the table for folks that are the direct targets of harm. So I know I've gone over a little bit. Thank you so much for indulging me, but I will back off at this point.
Excellent, important ethical questions, personal questions, theological questions, rhetorical questions. So thank you, Dr. Letter. Deeply appreciate that. I'm looking forward to the discussion as it circles back to the end. If I could now have Diana Humble offer her presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for spending a little bit of time with us this afternoon, indulging our ideas and sharing your feedback. I'm going to be talking a bit about digital media and how it intersects with gendered violence and with the patriarchy, and as well as how this specific sect that I'm talking about, incels, which is a shorthand for involuntary celibate, which is typically a group of men that wish to be having sex but are not having sex and resent women for not providing that service, so to say, to them. This is one presentation I'm going to be giving at the National Communication Association's annual meeting in November, and I'm really proud of the abstract I put together for it. It stems off of the theory of apocalyptic masculinity as a rhetorical formation. It emerges in response to perceived civilizational decline, sociopolitical dislocation, and the erosion of traditional gender hierarchies. And so within this paper, I'm going to talk very briefly about what I really need help with, and ideally your thoughts and assistance is theories of religion, theories underpinning being within the church, because I'm theorizing within this that incels are positioning themselves as followers of a religion rather than people coping with a specific life circumstance, because most people go through a period in their life where they don't have sex for 3 months, 6 months, years at a time, but that isn't something that makes them resort to gendered violence or see themselves as a victim. So they're taking that life circumstance and making it a personal identity. So within the case study, I'm zeroing in on how incels feel themselves unable to ascend. That's the term that they assign to having sex for the first time. Ascend in society. So they have recalculated and reformatted what ascension is by creating the term incel sainthood. So throughout the incel forums that I populate and I read, there are specific, you could call them influencers, I call them mass murderers, that are lauded by these individuals. The primary one you've probably heard of, if you've ever heard of incels before, you've probably heard of Elliot Rodger, who was a shooter in Isla Vista, California back in about 2014. He went on a rampage. He had a um, big manifesto that got published, leaked online. He had a YouTube channel and everything. He became the face of the incels. And so on the incel forum that I frequent, he's referred to as Saint ER. ER referring to Elliot Rodger. He died in that shooting, so this is a posthumous reflection on his life. But he's not the only saint referenced and lauded within those forums. They also reference the ones you may be familiar with, Saint Cho in reference to the Virginia Tech shooter, Saint Lapine, who is a Canadian anti-feminist mass murderer, and Saints Harris and Klebold in reference to the Columbine school shooters. So in this presentation, I'm arguing that the incel community appropriates Christian terminology, Ascension, Sainthood. Elliot Rodger called his mass murdering spree his day of retribution, that they are appropriating Christian terminology as a way to self-soothe and legitimize violence against women, especially. By positioning themselves as a follower of a religion rather than people struggling with a specific life circumstance, incels are absolving themselves of personal responsibility for failing to fit into society. And I think declaring this moral, religious superiority reinforces the fallacy that incels are being unjustly denied status, sex, and influence by modern feminism. Since they feel unable to ascend through romantic or sexual contact, incels created a new form of ascension, which is incel sainthood, which is awarded by the masses to those who died for the incel cause. By awarding violence with sainthood status, incels are setting the standard that gendered violence is a valid reaction to practices that go against what they term their religion. Okay, I think I'll stop there. I'm not sure how long I've talked, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you guys for listening.
You're doing great. If you want to say a little more, you're welcome to. But if you're done, that's okay.
I've said my piece. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Super appreciate that. That is fascinating. I'm looking forward to not just the discussion, but also where your research goes. Okay. Let us go on then to Dr. Cassandra Gould from Eden Theological Seminary on bread, bodies, and the budget, the rhetoric of Black resistance from the pulpit to the public square.
Thank you. And thank you all again for this opportunity. I want to name that this is an emerging project, right? Obviously, in the aftermath of this deadly federal budget, passed by MAGA Republicans only, that puts bodies, particularly brown and Black bodies, vulnerable bodies at risk of death, including children starving to death. But it is the same regime that actually funds the starvation and death of bodies across the globe, particularly in this moment, even in Gaza. And I believe that in this moment, as we are witnessing this country's perpetual obsession with controlling, commodifying, and punishing the bodies of the vulnerable, it is an opportunity for resistance and further preparation, because it will get worse before it gets better. It presents an opportunity for particularly people in the Black prophetic church tradition, but not just for us. We embody what it means to resist with our rhetoric, whether that rhetoric is heard from the pulpit, from the public square, which is a space that I occupy most often than not, as well as in movement space. So does not just exclusively belong to the church, but it also gives others an opportunity to glean from our vast playbook or this kind of these historical archives that we have around rhetoric. And so my hope is to curate a new source of resistance so that when people look back on this time period, they can say that these were the Black activists, the Black organizers, the Black prophetic preachers who stood in the gap and helped to shape the resistance that's happening in this moment. This is what we are up against. I took this video too close for my comfort, but we are up against this, not just isolated in California, but coming soon potentially to a neighborhood near you. We know that this budget, and I'm gonna stick to my time. I'm a Black preacher, but I'm sticking to my time. This budget is impacting our bodies. It is impacting our ability to live freely and fully. As Christians, there are ways in which we are very obsessed with body. We repeat these words in some context every week from 1 Corinthians 11. On the same night that Jesus was betrayed, when he gave thanks, he broke the bread and offered it up and said, "This is my body. Do this in remembrance of me." He does the same thing, obviously, with the blood. As Christians, when we think of the body, we often initially go to Christ's body, his body as it was in flesh walking amongst us, his broken body hanging on the tree, his dead body that was buried, and ultimately his resurrected body. The empire then broke God's body as an act of ultimate betrayal, demonstrating like the antithesis of Christ's work. Dr. Dolores Williams reminds us that Jesus did not come to die. Jesus came to show us how to live and survive in the midst of evil and death systems. And I believe that the rhetoric, particularly from the Black prophetic tradition, actually gives us those same tools to, it speaks truth to power, but simultaneously helps us to know how to live. This is an old quote that I found in an old paper that I wrote. And since this Dr. Johnson Symposium, I hope I got this quote right, from one of his older works. Prophetic rhetoric is not just about speaking truth to power, but it also speaks to healing to the wounded, hope to the marginalized, and resistance to systems that claim divine authority while doing harm. As a womanist, not that I'm not sharing any artifacts from the brethren, but I am also focusing on a womanist theology. I'm reminded by a mentor beloved in one of her books, African American Women's Sermons, Dr. Teresa Fry Brown says, are rhetorical sites of struggle, hope, and communal memory, and they are theology in motion. Katie Geneva Cannon reminds us that the truth of the gospel is found in the day-to-day struggles of Black women. Our bodies bear the marks of oppression and resistance, and it is through those bodies that we get to tell the truth about God. Even in some of what I've heard from other panelists throughout the day, we are in a battle for narrative. And I believe in this moment that we are able to use some of the artifacts that are literally from 2025, from Trump 2, that deals with the budget and whatever else this authoritarian regime actually throws at us. And so the methodology that I'm proposing to use is obviously rhetorical criticism by analyzing sermons, public prayers, liturgies, and faith-based op-eds, and texts that function rhetorically to resist state violence, prophetic theological discourse by specifically highlighting mostly womanist sermons and Black theological epistemologies. And then some self-reflectiveness using the autoethnographic from my own experience, my own artifacts that I bring when I show up in public places, whether it is through sermons or actually occasionally writing literature for protests. To date, while naming again that this budget that passed just happened a few days ago, technically, the beginning of this month. The artifacts that I have already started to analyze and that have become my starting point is what I called it was a womanist sermon preached by Dr. Letter and my beloved pastor from Job 4, Bill Lamar. Miss Job Speaks, and it spoke to it humanized her. It did not demonize her, but it spoke to the reality of when we are living under oppressive situations and the weight and the pain and the grief that we carry. And so in this moment, we are going to have to not merely speak truth to power, but make space to actually hold each other's grief and to give each other the permission to grieve. One of the ways in which the empire disembodies us is by actually trying to separate us from our emotions and etc. And it puts our bodies in a perpetual motion, even when we should stop and actually start to grieve. One of the other artifacts that I am using, actually multiple artifacts from Pink Roll Chronicles with Dr. Melva Sampson. But in the immediate aftermath of this, she preached the sermon, "We Will Not Bow." That language is very familiar in the prophetic context. And then there is locally Mia McLean, pastor of Riverside Baptist Church, and she uses an old gospel song, a real gospel song, not CCM, but she uses an old gospel song and preaches there is a storm on the horizon. And she has a voice, so she could actually sing it, and you could feel it. And it was done to talk back in the spirit of bell hooks, right? In the spirit of Kimberly Johnson and others who have helped us to have talk back to the empire. But it also was an act of preparation. She talked about living through Katrina and what it looks like when a storm is coming, so that people would not just be distracted by what is happening in the moment, but so that they would have what they need to actually start to be able to prepare. That is basically the crux of it. Where I know I need help. I'm not a rhetorical scholar. Probably should have been, but I'm not. But needing help around some of the methodology and really more of the scholarship, particularly around rhetoric. I think the central question, and I'll stop after that, that is guiding this work is how do Black religious leaders and organizers and scholars informed by the Black prophetic tradition craft a moral counter narrative in response to policies that dismember the body politic and crucify the vulnerable continuously? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Deeply grateful for just the self-reflexivity and the really the pathos that has gone into all three of these presentations. I am intrigued by the connection between them, not just the reflection on ethics in general, but particularly violence against bodies and the rhetorical responses that are needed and need to go beyond just surface level analysis to something deeper. So thank you all so much for that. I will open the floor to any the I will open the internet floor, the Zoom floor to anyone who wants to comment. But I'll go ahead and get us started. I would like to actually start with Diana Humble and ask if you have done much work on martyrology and how that might provide some kind of a theoretical or even a methodological lens to kind of guide what you're looking at. And it would be kind of a subversive work, I think, to look at how martyrdom rhetoric has historically worked, even sometimes for people who have been pretty skeezy. So anyway.
No, I haven't, and I appreciate you bringing it up because, like, just from my very quick Google search here, I could see a lot of ways that it would naturally align because just martyrdom being what it is a lot of people think sacrificing themselves in service of the cause, and that's what these great acts of violence really are self-sacrificing in order to further and amplify their voices in a time and a place where they feel like they're being squashed or not listened to. So absolutely could see that fitting in.
Yeah, are you familiar with the writer Jeff Sharlet?
No.
So Jeff Sharlet has written a lot on the Christian nationalist movement, and he wrote on the family. I think was the thing that made him big. I think it was turned into a documentary about the politicians in Washington who are like sort of Christian nationalists supporting each other. Anyway, after the January 6th insurrection, he followed the martyrdom narrative of Ashley Babbitt, who was one of the women killed in the insurrection attempt. And he saw how Christian nationalists essentially turned her into a martyred saint. And so he might, that book is called The Undertow: Scenes from a Slow Civil War. And it might give you not only some really interesting insights into thinking about that, but also maybe even give you some methodological, angles to approach it from. So he's not specifically doing academic work, but I mean, it's smart stuff. I mean, he's doing martyrology is what he's doing. So anyway, yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Anybody else? Go ahead, Dr. Letter.
Thanks, Diana. I just wanted to mention also that I didn't know how it might connect or if it would show as maybe a counter or something like that. But I was thinking about the these are like I'm going to get the centuries wrong, but I don't know, like 15th century women like Julian of Norwich, or I don't know, when the history folks can come and help me out. But so women who, some of whom were offered sainthood, right? But they were intentionally celibate. And so there's all these narratives that come from their writings about how their celibacy is a spiritual practice, and that Christ was their husband, that God was their husband, and that whole narrative around that as a counter to how incels are not only just appropriating Christian language and sainthood, but also the direct contrast with the spiritual practice of celibacy, and coming from women.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, because that, in my mind, immediately opens the door of like, so who is God? Who are they looking to?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both
Sure.
for your thoughts.
I'll go and to my co-panelists, you both made me smarter. Dr. Letter, you are not alone in that theology of forgiveness, because I don't buy the rest of it. One of the things, and it may have been in your abstract, forgive me for not remembering that, but when you talk about Mother Emanuel, one of the things that I have been struck by, and it has been a conversation amongst surviving families of that, is how some were pushed into this quick forgiveness, right? And then the documentary that, the well, it might not even be an AME documentary. I think we got to see it first. That was about them, that really caused an uproar amongst some of the survivors. And it just seems that often when something happens, particularly to Black people of color, the first question is around forgiveness, right? Bodies are like still bleeding on the floor, and folk are asking you, are you going to forgive? So you may I don't know if you are including some of that in your research, but
Yes, absolutely. It was for time only that I was just kind of brushing past it. Yeah.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Marco McNeil.
I want to kind of piggyback off of Dr. Gould a little bit with Dr. Letter. Thank you for just saying it out loud, because um, as I'm going into my third year of my first pastorate, I have not preached forgiveness because I struggle with it. And I struggle with, hearing people say, oh, God wants us to forgive, but then I also hear, may the Lord watch between me and thee while we are apart one from another. So let us just go ahead, be apart, and not have to worry about crossing each other's paths again. And if we do cross each other's path, act like you don't see me. Treat me like the invisible man. So I just appreciate you saying it out loud. I have not been off camera. I haven't been on camera this whole time. But when you said that, I said, no, I got to come on camera and say this. So thank you for just saying it out loud. I truly appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for saying your comment. I appreciate it. Honestly, I think some of why this continues is because folks aren't talking about it, or we're talking about it with small groups that we feel comfortable enough with. So it stays there because either we don't feel like we have another opportunity, or we haven't figured out maybe together how to bring it out of the small circles. I'm not sure. There's a lot of pressure to forgive. And a lot of different reasons for it.
So I was, as you were presenting, the first thing that I wrote down, and I wrote down a lot, just so many notes on your presentation, Dr. Letter, but the first thing I wrote down was, okay, how are we defining forgiveness? And then you came back later and you were like, okay, I've looked at all these different understandings of forgiveness, and I found them lacking. I do think probably just an expansive discussion of, like, you could probably do in your work a survey of, you're talking about writing a book on this, a survey of the definitions of forgiveness and pointing out their common failures or unique failures, whatever it is, because I think that's going to be key, because I think you're right. There are various qualities of definitions of forgiveness, right? From the kind that's really just dismissive and easy, to forgiveness that's really hard won, but for you still insufficient. And I think working to that rhetorically, structurally in your argument will be important.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think if this becomes a book, I can imagine a whole chapter just on that, because it's so key, because it's going to trip so many people up. Well, what about this? And what about this? And doesn't God say this? And the Bible and blah, blah, blah,
Yeah. We'll get our sword drills out. Yeah, those are. Go ahead, Jessica Abel. Want to pronounce your name right, but you're on mute.
They say Abel in the South, but it is actually Abel. Kind of piggybacking, I guess, on the same conversation, I wanted to say that portion, that little pericope of John, has been useful for me in my own life in setting boundaries. This is really how I've thought about it. that like a kind of withdrawal of myself, right? And I really appreciate your framing it in the forgiveness, but I think the thing that your research and your thoughts really put me in the frame of mind was the indigenous tradition of the right of refusal, which is a sacred response to things, the right to say no, the right to withdraw. I think the most contemporary application of it that we saw was the lockdown that happened in tribal nations in the first couple of years of COVID, right? An actual patrolling of those highways, an actual shutting of those doors. But it's a long part of that tradition. And it just really made me think of that. We rarely look at the sacred nature of no, but I swear to little baby Jesus, probably the most common thing I say to other women is no is a complete sentence.
Thank you. It's really good. Could I shift, because I mean I think we'll come back to Dr. Letter. But just to make sure we get Dr. Gould in here. Dr. Gould, one of the things when I was researching you to host to chair this panel, was I wrote down next to your name, public theology. You seem to have a very strong passion for theology that is done in a very public way. So thank you for that. That actually raised a question for me. In the first line of your abstract, you say this project explores the rhetorical strategies of Black faith leaders. I wonder, do you have a definition or boundaries around what it means to be a faith leader? In other words, for the actual writing process, does that mean any pastor, any in this situation, any Black pastor? What is it? Somebody who is aligned with public theology? So, like, how are you working with that
Yeah,
definition?
so I intentionally use faith leader, mostly because of the way various religious institutions exclude women. There are
Okay.
traditions, even Christian traditions, right? That will not allow women to be ordained. When I think about my Muslim siblings, I do work in a somewhat multi faith space, but with a focus on various expressions of Black faith. And I think about Muslim women who are some of the most brilliant thought leaders who often write and are scholars about these things, but they would not be considered. I can't use the word clergy, so I use that broadly. I think what I would define, and my hope is that maybe this becomes a book. What I would define is how my boundaries around Black prophetic traditions, not merely being a Black faith. And I'm not, and let me also say that you don't have to be Black to be in the prophetic tradition. As I look at my sister Michelle on this space, right? You don't have to be Black to, and you don't have to even be in a Black faith space to be prophetic, a part of the prophetic tradition. But I am, for the sake of the project and the scholarship, I am honing in on faith leaders who embody this kind of prophetic resistance. We can go back to Harriet Tubman as an organizer. We can go back to Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, right? And others who have embodied a resistance, particularly a public act of resistance that is in their teaching, their preaching, and etc. Those that are not silent when all I got a scholar for you to read up on, Dr. Johnson. Those who are not silent in the face of bodies being pummeled, and not just the bodies that look like theirs, right? So that is, I hope that answers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else with questions or comments?
I'll hop off and say this really quickly to Dr. Gould. I live, work, and play here in Memphis, Tennessee, and I've done community organizing on, through another network. And in my conversation with specifically African American pastors, there was two things that came up. One was a lack of education around certain issues, like the one that you're presenting. I, we literally in our network have been talking about creating like a 0900 course on just the public things that are going on because they don't know and they don't pay attention. They think about what's happening on their block and inside their four walls and nothing more. So that was one thing. And I forgot the second thing, but we'll just go with that. I literally had it and it just went away. I don't know what happened, but there.
And
Yeah,
I
and
think
I think
Allie,
that this
oh,
points
go ahead.
to I might have run into a couple of them before. Uh, um, they would not be cited in this project. But this kind of project actually helps to inform them and gives them also some on-ramps, right, as to how they can engage. I mean, I'm engaged in op-eds and other kinds of statements and etc. As well. So thank you for that transparency as well.
I put the thought in the chat. That's exactly, I had an older pastor tell me that very thing. I don't want to end up like King. And so he stays away from the chaos and the fray. But then I had to remember, like, oh, you were actually around in the 60s when this happened. And that has been the thought of some of the pastors that I've encountered in Memphis. Not everywhere, but Memphis specifically, that's been one of the thoughts.
The risk is real. Ask me how I know. So, it's also like being like Jesus. So,
That's a good one. That's a good comeback.
Anyone else? I
Yeah.
was thinking, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. No, oh, that's right. Allie. Yes, Allie had a comment.
Yeah. I, I sorry. I have something to share, but I'm sure it will become apparent that it's related eventually. But with with Dr. Michelle Leder's project, it got me thinking about something Mormon. Um, so I don't, I mean, I'm sure this is shared in other traditions as well, but I just know a lot about Mormonism. And in Mormon theology, they talk a lot about how the atonement, part of it occurred on the cross and part in Gethsemane. And in Gethsemane, the main focus of that suffering that he went through was the suffering the sins of other people and things that, aren't because of you. And that can also include things like natural disasters and stuff like that, but especially like when other people do you harm. Um, and then I, I had to go look this up in Isaiah. Hold on. Uh, they tend to read this. It was our sicknesses that he himself bore and our pains that he carried. That focus that on stuff that's pains that are not related to us, like I'm a sinner. Um, that I think I'm sure that when you developed your theology around unforgiveness, and how Christ is in solidarity with people who suffer the wrongdoing of others, that might be kind of cool. And I just wanted to share that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Allie.
Can I jump in here and just say
Sure.
real quick? I mean, this isn't a good this again, and I'll just say it. This panel demonstrates again the importance of religious rhetoric, religious communication to a myriad of different issues, problems, and how we can actually come at this and understanding what we are studying by understanding, you know, the theological frameworks that's around it. And if I've told my students, and Diana is one of our great graduate students doing great work, she knows, and I've heard, if I've shared this with anyone, I've shared it with graduate students, like, if once we start to unpack some of the a lot of stuff that we don't really study until we get to the theological frameworks that's holding them up. We keep on pulling away and we keep on going on the surface, but until we drill down and say, oh my God, this, you know, oh, he's King Cyrus. Who is Cyrus? What I don't, that's not, you know, Derrida didn't say nothing about that, or, you know, Nietzsche. No, we ain't talking, wait a minute, who is this? All of a sudden now, it's unpacking, and we began to see that something else is going on. And again, this is why we're doing this. This is why the center is here. And I am just so pleased and thankful and thanking all of you for joining in. It's just a reminder every time I hear panels like this, you know, the whole notion of pushing back on forgiveness and this whole notion of the expectation around it, faith language, Incel culture, you know, I've always just loved your work. So I mean, that you have done, and and I'm like, oh, and when Tom mentioned martyrdom, I said, right, that makes perfect sense. That could be a framework. That could be the whole like lens that you come in, you know, at this with. But you know, I just wanted to drop that in. I mean, thank y'all again for the good work and the scholarship that you're producing. And we want to keep this up, and we want to get this out there. Thanks again, y'all.
Thank you all so much. Great presentations. Thank you for letting me chair the two that I got to, and thanks to Dr. Johnson for the invitations.
Tom, you know that you're my friend, my colleague, co-collaborator, co-teacher. Tom and I just taught a class, a D-Min class at the Memphis Theological Seminary on Christian nationalism. So I had a great time unpacking that. And I know that some of you are going to submit 8-week courses for the certificate program that I mentioned about earlier. So I'm looking forward to that as well. If there are not any more questions or comments, we can take a break here and come back at 3 o'clock for panel number 4, which I believe, again, is going to be a great panel as well, too. Thank you again, and I'll see you at 3 o'clock.